Good afternoon, Alex. How you doing?
Hey, Kelly, what's up, man?
Oh, man, just enjoying, actually, this little storm front that came through, cooled things down nicely in Austin. It's a little muggy, but I've been in Las Vegas, and I will tell you, walking around in Vegas is like walking inside a hairdryer.
Yeah.
Have you been there in the summer?
Yeah. Dry heat. There's a fire aspect to it, right?
Yeah. It doesn't feel wet. It feels just like I said, the breeze was blowing. Feels like you're getting hit by a blow dryer. And you're just thinking, man, everybody thinks this dry heat is great, but it actually can be pretty painful.
Well, you don't sweat as much, but it always feels like you're about to catch on fire.
Yeah. Well, got back and took a flight. I think we take advantage of or take for granted the fact that we can fly halfway across the country in a couple of hours. Do you have any idea how long it took to get from Spain to America for Columbus? You know how long that voyage was?
Oh, man. Let's see. Probably a month.
It was 70 days, 10 weeks.
Wow.
Now, that did include a stop in the Canary Islands. Now, I also have a guest back on today. My cousin Jay, the airline pilot, is back. Jay, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Hey, Jay.
We were just talking before this about the fact that that there are some really great timelines of how the voyage across the pond, so to speak, going from Europe to the U.S. or back, changed over time. Now, one thing I didn't realize that back in the 1400s, 1600s, it was actually faster to go from North America back over to Europe because of the trade winds.
Yes, it is. You generally have tailwinds flying from west to east.
So 1492, 70 days for Columbus to do it. 1600s, 4 to 6 weeks to get across. Now, that was getting a little bit better because ships were getting a little better. Mapping was getting a little better. 1700s, 5 to 8 weeks. The 1800s really was the big transition. So during the 1800s, when we started, that was the peak of sailing. That was a peak of these big wooden ships, the peak of, navigating using sextants and stars and all that stuff. But by the end of the 1800s, we had these dual, I guess they called them dual propeller steamships that could get across. Fastest trip across in the 1800s, and they called this was from Europe to the U.S., they called it the Blue Riband, Riband. I had never heard of this before, but it was like the award you won for getting the fastest trip across. It was by a German ship, the Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross, and in 1897, take a guess how long it took them to get across from Europe over to North America.
3 weeks?
6 days.
Oh, wow.
Big jump.
An improvement.
It's smoking.
So then we get into the 1900s, and the 1900s was another big transition because, you started off without aviation, and then all of a sudden aviation hits, and you're starting to see people like Amelia Earhart making these long journeys. You're starting to see records get broken. You're going from single engine to twin engines, from standard propellers to turboprops, and then eventually to jets. Now, the pinnacle of flight across the pond was, of course, what, Alex? You know this.
Was it a Zeppelin?
No, the Concorde.
Did we talk about the Concorde?
We never have.
Oh, well, then why would you make me go back into the... You said it was a dead end.
I mean, it is today. That's today's dead end, is the Concorde.
Oh, yeah.
Concorde no longer flies.
Of course. No, you had me going down the wrong path in my head. Of course.
No worries.
The fastest way that people have ever gotten across the ocean, of course, is the Concorde.
And 3.5 hours was a typical flight. There was a record-breaking flight for, I think it was 2 hours and 56 minutes that they took it across. But that was with a big tailwind. One of the amazing things about the Concorde, it went from 1976 to 2003, is that when you were coming, I think when you were going, going west, you were actually going faster than the Earth's rotation. And so you would see a sunrise twice. You might see it in where you started, and then you would see the sunrise on the same day where you landed.
Wow.
Because you're
see
traveling.
The sunrise in the west as you chase the sun.
And it takes off pretty much straight up in the air, right? I mean, the angle on that is crazy, right? You're going up like a rocket practically, right?
Well, it had a delta wing, and Jay, you can jump in and kind of correct this or add detail to it, but the delta wing didn't have a lot of lift at low speed. So they had what they called afterburners or reheats, and they would kick these things on, and that's how they would get airspeed to get the thing off the ground. Is that fair to say, Jay?
Yes, they would use the reheat, what we call in the military afterburners. They would use that for takeoff and to break the sound barrier.
Jay, was the Concorde particularly difficult to fly? Like, did it require a lot more training, or was it pretty much similar to?
I know it took considerable training. In fact, British Airways, if you signed up to fly the Concorde, you were committed for that for the rest of your career because it costs so much to train on it. But the training was extensive, and it also had a second officer, flight engineer, and his training was very extensive as well. They had so many systems on that aircraft that you just don't have on subsonic airliners.
What is the difference between a flight engineer and a co-pilot?
Well, a co-pilot is in the right seat and flies the airplane as well. Flight engineer sits behind the two pilots and runs systems. And so in the case of the Concorde, the really big one was managing fuel, because they actually managed their center of gravity by pumping fuel forward and back to keep things balanced for the particular phase of flight that they are in.
Kelly, would you say I'm the flight engineer on the show or the co-pilot on the show?
I think in most cases you're probably the pilot. I'm the flight engineer, and I don't know that we have a co-pilot. Jay is the co-pilot today, even though in real life he outranks us both. But no, I want to go back. So one of the things that blew my mind, I did read a very long, it was like 7-8 hours of audiobook about the Concorde. It started at, any guess, Alex, on what year they started talking about the Concordes?
Oh, man. Well, it was probably, I'm trying to figure if, probably in the late 50s, early 60s.
Mid 50s. Yeah, you're right. So the Concorde actually flew from 76 to 2003, but in 54, the United Kingdom and France started talks about it, putting together initial plans, feasibility studies, budgets, stuff like that. And in 1962, the two countries signed an agreement to build these things. And the cost at that time, estimated in 62, was $93 million. Now, I converted all this from francs and euros to dollars, or pounds. Today, that would be $2.4 billion that they were talking about in 2026 money. They started building 6 prototypes.
Not per plane, though, for the whole program, you're saying?
For the initial program to get to their first plane, in order to get the first plane built. And then each thing after that was an additional cost.
Okay.
Because their original idea was they were going to mass produce these. People were going to love it. And they were going to order, all these airlines were going to order hundreds of them. They estimated 350 would be produced initially.
Yeah.
And that they would be able to make a lot of money by selling these to other airliners, to other airlines.
They were never able to get the cost down for the general public, right?
Yeah, all the major airlines were going to be all over this thing.
Yeah, they were until several things happened. But we'll get to that. That's a little later in the story. But initially, they built 6 prototypes. The first one flew in March of 1969 from Toulouse. And the second one did a test flight, and it was the first British Airways one, flew in October of 1969. And they both got their certificate of airworthiness that same in 1975. So I think there's the initial prototype design, there's the building and testing of it, and then airworthiness is where what we would say the FAA here In this case, this was the French version of that and the UK version of that, which I think is a Civil Aviation Administration. They have to actually award it and say, okay, this is worthy to fly. And it's something that is a big step, because once you do that, then you can actually carry passengers on it.
Yeah, the certification process is a very long, drawn out deal by the FAA, and then the Europe equivalent is EASA, EASA, which I can't remember exactly what that stands for.
Well, one of the interesting things about the Concorde, you were talking about the delta wing, Alex, and the fact that it took off at a very steep angle, is that it had a really narrow fuselage. Because if you're going to fly it above the speed of sound, you need a narrow fuselage. And it only had 2 rows of 2 seats. So it was a four across kind of thing. There was no center seat in it, but the seats were actually pretty small. Kind of like if you've been on a regional jet, going from Dallas to Austin or Houston or whatever. Those kind of planes, a lot of times they'll have 2 on one and 1 on the other, but this had 2 on both sides, very small windows, but no middle seats, I think, was actually something people liked and would go back to today. I know like Porter Airlines, which is a fairly new airline out of Canada, has the Embraer 195 E2, which is just 2 sets of 2 seats on either side, so no middle seats. I feel like I would pay more on an airliner if I had a little bit more space. Like I'm okay with that, and that was part of what the appeal of the Concorde was, in addition to the speed. The Concorde's other things that were really unique about it, besides the delta wing, was the droop nose. So this was a nose that would go down, I think, 12 degrees or something like that, 5 to 12 degrees, depending on what it was doing. And it had to do that because the pilot couldn't really see when the nose was up in its horizontal position. So they would actually droop this nose down. I think most famous pictures of the Concorde, when it's landing or taking off, that nose is down, and it looks kind of funny. It makes it look a little bit comical, I think, but quite an engineering feat. And the other big thing with it was, because it was taking in air at such high speeds, it had to have this really sophisticated set of dampeners and ramps inside the air intake, to slow the air down to below supersonic, so that when it went into the turbojet, it was able to process it and push it out properly. I mean, just really, for considering it was designed in the 50s and 60s and kind of redesigned in the 70s, it was just a marvel of engineering.
When you get supersonic, aerodynamics change a whole lot. So I understand that they had 5,000 hours of wind tunnel testing for the delta wing, and it went through numerous modifications because it has to fly at such a variety of speeds. On approach speeds, it had such a high angle of attack that part of the wing would actually be stalled. There'd be vortices along the leading edge. And sometimes you could see them in pictures, these little clouds that run the length of the
making little
edge.
Circles, like making little circles on them.
Yes, there's a vortex on each wing, and because of the high angle of attack, that's why they had to have the droop nose, because pilots just couldn't see to land.
Yeah, if it's coming in at a steep angle like that, they're basically looking up, and the nose is in their way, right? And so this droop nose allowed them to be able to see. Well, before we get into too much about the plane itself, I wanted to tell you where the name came from. Any guesses on that?
No, Concorde with an E.
Yes.
I know the E, they made it for the French, to make the French happy.
Yes. So it basically was the idea of an agreement or a union between the two countries. So the Concorde was, which is pretty much the same definition in English and in French. But there was some debate. The English wanted it without the E initially. The French wanted it with the E because that's how they spell it. And the British eventually agreed to add the E, but said that it stood for excellence, Europe, and England. So there was a little bit of marketing spin on it. A lot of this was about marketing, because this was something new and this was going to be more expensive than your average plane. So they had to really push it as a luxury kind of thing. Now, one of their big challenges was they couldn't fly over land in a lot of situations, especially in the U.S., because of the sonic boom. So they were limited to flying across water, like routes with a lot of water. So a route from Europe to the U.S., and initially it was JFK and Washington Dulles was their main route that they would go back and forth because there was a lot of ocean crossing at that point, and they could get to Mach 2.
Was this British Airways or Air France?
Both.
And
So-
they were both called the Concorde?
Yep. It was a partnership between the two, a Concorde
Okay.
between
That was before the code sharing days. It was pretty unusual, right?
Yeah, I think initially it was Airbus that built this, right, Jay?
The company did eventually turn into Airbus. It wasn't called Airbus at the time.
Okay. Interestingly, their very first trip to the United States in 1973 was a landing at DFW to mark the airport's opening. So in 1973 is when DFW opened. Now, here's another
They
little
pulled
fact.
it off.
How did they
without-
pull it off?
Yeah, without flying over too much land.
Maybe they went
Well,
subsonic.
They didn't go supersonic over land.
Oh.
Yeah, the U.S. still has a regulation today that you
Right.
cannot fly supersonic over land.
Right.
So kind of an interesting little fact, and Jay, you can tell me whether I should not include this or not, but Jay's father actually owned some of the land that was eventually became DFW. Isn't that right?
That's correct. Yeah, before they moved to where they are now, they had their land taken by eminent domain to build the new airport.
And you grew up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area after living in Hawaii briefly. And do you remember when the Concorde came into DFW?
I do not. I knew Braniff, which was a Dallas-based airline, had an interchange with the Concorde, but I didn't realize that the inaugural flight to the U.S. was landed at DFW.
Well, getting back to a couple of things we were talking about a moment ago, which was the sort of structure of it. One of the really, really challenging things about flying at supersonic speeds is that the aluminum, the exterior skin of the Concorde, would heat up tremendously. It supposedly expanded by 6 to 10 inches during flight, and it's said that flight crews could actually see a gap between the engineer's console and the bulkhead wall when they were at speed that would disappear when the plane slowed down and cooled down. So just imagine this little bit of, 10 inches doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're thinking about a physical thing that isn't supposed to expand, the stress on that metal was one of the biggest challenges, and it also was a limiting factor for how fast it could go. They figured out that they could go Mach 2.02, and it would heat up and cool down. They basically had 2 cycles of heating and cooling during flight, and this was something that really stressed the metal, and they had to do a lot of fatigue modeling to figure out if that was going to break the things. And they had a limited lifespan.
They had a limitation based on temperature, which the probe was right in the very tip of the nose. They had to slow down if it was getting too hot.
What kind of altitude are we talking about here?
57,000 feet, 58,000 feet, somewhere between 57 and 60. So, Jay, what does a typical airliner fly at?
Well, my airliner has a maximum altitude of 43,100 feet, and we typically fly 39, 40, 41,000 feet. When we're really heavy right after takeoff, we'll start maybe 33, 30 to 35. But as we burn off fuel, we'll go up to the higher altitudes. But nothing near 60,000 feet.
There's more lift at lower altitudes, right? The air is thicker, so you get a little more lift.
Yeah, the performance is definitely better at the lower altitudes, but as you get to the higher altitudes, the less air actually means less drag, so you can go faster on the same amount of fuel.
Yeah, so 60,000 feet, they're cruising 20,000 feet above other airliners. And one of the things in the book that he talked about was they would fly over another airliner and look down, and it would be going the same direction. They were all, they're all in these kind of layers, like a cake. There's kind of the takeoff and landing. There's the cruising speed for airliners, and then there's a Concorde up here. They would look down, and it would look like the other plane was going backwards because they were going so much faster, like 800 miles an hour faster than it or something.
Yeah,
and it would just kind of shoot beneath them.
How does that altitude compare with like military jets?
Well, I know like the SR-71, which was a reconnaissance spy plane, it would fly at Mach 3 and in excess of 80,000 feet.
Wow.
But, the typical fighter jet doesn't fly typically that high. They might be able to fly for short bursts, but the Concorde was very special in that they had extended time, supersonic, and fighters typically will only fly supersonic for occasional bursts.
So in a 3-hour flight, would you say 3.5 hours, Kelly?
Yeah, 3.5 across the pond.
So how much of that 3.5 hours is actually at Mach 1 or faster?
I think it was about 60 to 70% of the flight.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a big chunk of it. They
Most
had to
of the
take
water
off.
part.
Yeah, exactly. They're taking off from Heathrow, and let's say they're going to JFK, but they're not going. It's interesting because everybody thinks they're going this direct east to west route. They're really not. They're kind of going north over the pole, right, Jay? It's a little bit more deceptive.
They're flying the Great Circle routes. So you can get a really good indication of a Great Circle route by taking a thread and a globe and finding the shortest distance between two cities. It's really kind of fun to do. It's amazing how far north you go.
So they're flying at supersonic for let's say 60% of the flight. Do you, Jay? I'm sure you know this, Alex. Any guess on how many miles per hour Mach 1 is?
Oh man, I was going to ask you that because I'd be embarrassed about not knowing.
Mach 1 depends on the temperature, but it's typically at sea level like 716 miles an hour, but it actually goes down the higher you go as the temperature goes down.
Well, the internet said 767 miles per hour at standard atmospheric conditions. 767. So
okay.
Mach 2, let's just call it 1,400 miles per hour that they're going at. And what do you typically fly at, Jay, in your 787?
0.85, 0.86 Mach.
So
less than half.
yeah, half that speed.
At what speed would it be uncomfortable for the passengers? Just a regular Joe flying on business.
Well, as you approach the maximum speed, you start getting Mach buffet. That's where the air over the wings starts exceeding the speed of sound and separating from the wings, and it makes for a little rumble. It's not really uncomfortable, but it's noticeable.
You notice, you notice it. That would.
That's where the supersonic aerodynamics are just so fascinating because the subsonic airliners are built to not go the speed of sound and improve if or have efficiency in other areas, while Concorde just went right through the speed of sound and was more efficient at supersonic speeds.
And it wasn't very, from what the book said, it wasn't very efficient at low speeds. Like it actually was that was the more challenging time, was when you were flying at the slower speeds, when you were taking off and landing, of course. So one thing that was different about it, Alex, the tail section didn't have an actual elevator. It had a combination of elevator and aileron on that big wing, and they had a name for it. It was a aileron. Is that what they call it? Elevons.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of an elevator for lift, it was a combination of the ailerons for roll and for lift, right, Jay?
Yes, combination of ailerons and elevators. And
I guess I'm just wondering, like, for the passenger, was it a fun ride? Was it a scary ride? Was it? I mean, what was that experience like? Was it thrilling? Did people pass out?
So in the book, he talked a lot about the passengers on this thing. First of all, he this pilot that wrote the book, Mike Bannister, he said that there was a perception that the Concorde was for the rich, that it was a very elitist thing. And it was, based on ticket prices, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he also said that they really tried to make it a different experience, and that they also tried to they would do these specials, and they would have a lot of public outreach where they would do these trips of a lifetime for people. So they might have, movie stars and rock stars and bankers and business travelers on board, but they would also try to get on every flight ordinary people who would sort of spread the evangelism of it, to go out and say, hey, I flew on the Concorde and it was amazing. To your question about was it comfortable, they were serving high-end champagne. They were serving high-end caviar. They were one of the pilot's things was he had to make the flight smooth enough that when they poured the $500 bottle of champagne, nothing spilled. That was kind of his way of looking at the luxury of it. But it was something that not many people got to do. And so when somebody that was on their trip of a lifetime, let's say a honeymoon or a 50th birthday or something like that, he would always bring them up into the cabin, into the flight deck. That was one of his things. And then when they had rock stars or royalty on board, they would do the same thing, of course. Some of the famous people that flew on it, you guys remember the Live Aid concert?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Phil Collins.
Phil Collins flew the Concorde in order to be able to play at both Wembley Stadium and JFK Stadium in Philadelphia on the same day. Paul McCartney was a regular commuter. He would occasionally bring his guitar out and play songs. Elton John was a regular on the Concorde. Michael Jackson was a regular on the Concorde. Mick Jagger was a regular on the Concorde. Sting, Rod Stewart, Dolly Parton was a regular. And then the Queen Mother, the mother of Queen Elizabeth II, took a flight on the Concorde to celebrate her 85th birthday in 1985. Sarah Ferguson and, of course, Princess Diana and, of course, Queen Elizabeth all flew on the Concorde. Sean Connery. And then back to another episode we just recently did, Andy Warhol was known to fly on the Concorde when he reached more fame. It was also big among golfers because they would go to the British Open, and a lot of American golfers would use the Concorde to get across and back. And there was a flight that featured, I think it was like Tom Watson, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Lee Trevino, just all these golfers. And the pilot was quoted as saying, I hope I don't mess this up because the entire golf world would be destroyed if I did. So you asked about if it was a thing to go on that people enjoyed or if it was scary. There was a guy named Fred Finn. He set the world record in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most Concorde flights as a passenger. You want to guess how many flights he took on the Concorde in that 76 to 2003?
I mean, how can I guess that?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
718 supersonic flights on the Concorde. This one guy did.
Why?
I think he was a business guy. I don't know. But here's what's interesting about it. The ticket pricing, we're talking about this this perceived value. In 1977, on their first couple of years, when they had just gotten it off the ground, so to speak, it was 431 pounds to fly one way. So that was about the equivalent of $2,500 to $3,000 for a standard first class ticket at that time in 77. And then they figured out that they were actually losing money and this wasn't working very well. So in the 80s, all these people that were flying on it, they did a survey of these business people. A lot of them were business people who had very tight timelines and celebrities. And they asked them, how much do you think a Concorde ticket costs? Almost everyone guessed higher than what the actual ticket cost was because their secretaries, their internal travel agents would book the flight for them, and they were so wealthy they had no idea what the cost was.
Nobody was actually paying their own money.
If you have to ask, you can't afford it.
Right. So at that point, British Airways realized, okay, they think it costs this much more than it actually costs. Let's raise the prices. And when they did raise the prices, they became profitable. That was actually their ability to get into the black with it. In 1990,
ultimately, that's probably what did them in.
Well, no, we're going to talk about that. It was one of the things. Yes, economics was a big factor, but
that was short-sighted, Kelly.
It was short-sighted for them to raise the price.
I think so. Yeah, just because they could.
Well, but they were losing money before that, and the cost to run this thing because of how much fuel it took. I was just talking before you came on with Jay about the amount of fuel that a plane will take to fly. It has a lot to do with how fast they go, but an average flight for a Concorde was one way 6,700 gallons, which, I don't know, Jay, is that a lot? It sounds like a lot to me.
Yeah, it is. It burns a considerable amount of fuel.
And the thing is, because of the way the fuselage was designed to go supersonic, it didn't allow the number of passengers that a 747 could carry. So they're carrying 100 passengers and burning that much fuel. And so your costs go way up because you're not, even though they're more expensive tickets, you don't have as many passengers. If you have 400 passengers on a 747, you're multiplying every ticket by 4, right? As far as your money goes. The other big thing that was problematic of it was there was a perception after a really horrible crash that happened in France. So the plane in France was fully loaded, and actually, according to the reports, might have been overweight. It was taking off from Charles de Gaulle en route to JFK in New York City with 100 passengers, and it hit some debris. The tire exploded. A bit of debris, either from the tire or from the debris that it hit on the runway, went up into the wing and punctured the fuel tank. And they tried to take off. The pilots made some mistakes. They cut one of the engines because they thought it was on fire, and they didn't get enough lift, and they crashed into a hotel and killed 100 people on board, plus 4 people that were in the hotel that were just minding their own business. They never really recovered from that. All Concorde flights, both from Air France and British Airways, were postponed or grounded for a period of time after that while the investigation went on. That happened in 2000, July 25th of 2000. That crash. Jay, you and I were talking about that a little bit ahead of time. First of all, as Jay was saying before, the Concorde had 11 fuel tanks, and the way that they would actually get that center of gravity right was by redistributing, pumping the fuel around within the length of the aircraft in order to get that center of gravity correct. When this thing hit, it punctured one of the fuel tanks, and that should have never happened, especially, and a tire exploding. Jay, you said, what happens if a tire gives out on a regular airliner, typically?
Well, tires blow and you just continue the takeoff, and a blown tire should not take down a whole airplane. So this is my personal opinion that the French really wanted to blame somebody besides the aircraft itself, and so they wanted to blame the debris on the runway as being responsible for the crash, which came from a U.S. airline. And so they tried to blame the U.S. airline on that. But my opinion is that a blown tire should not bring down an airplane.
That makes the landing exciting, but shouldn't.
Yeah, well, each bogey has 4 tires, and so 2 bogeys. And so if you blow a tire, you still have 7 tires to land on. So it might be a little bumpy, might be a little rough. You might blow some other tires on landing, but it's really not that terrible.
Have you ever had that happen? Had a blown tire?
I have had a couple of tire failures before, but on landing, not on takeoff. Oh. And
well, from that accident, Mike Bannister, the guy who wrote this book that I read or listened to as an audiobook, he was very adamant that there was no one single cause of failure. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of pilots say. I know when I took my Part 107 to get my drone license, they say that it's usually a series of things that happen, right? And so it was the debris. Yes, that was part of the problem. The fact that they punctured the fuel tank was part of the problem, of course, but also some of the decisions that the pilots had made. I think they were overweight a little bit. They had actually overfueled the aircraft. It was flying with more fuel than it should have had. They should have burned off some of that fuel before they took off. And then the pilots made some decisions. But it's very hard to say, to badmouth or to blame, pilots that have been killed in their job, right? But that's what it came down to, was just this series of failures.
Well, from
After that, oh, go ahead.
from a pilot's perspective, you have seconds to make a decision, and then the whole world takes years to determine what you should have decided in those very
Yeah.
few seconds. So
Yeah. But that's where all that training comes in, right? And that's where these standard operating procedures come on. From that, they did change the material that the wheels were made of, the tires were made of. They did put on some Kevlar, I believe, around the fuel tanks to keep that from being a possibility of those getting punctured again. And a lot of things actually made the aircraft better out of that. But of course, that doesn't get rid of the fact that over 100 people died and that the bad PR from that is going to last forever. You know, a lot of people, if you asked them about the Concorde, that might be all they remember was the crash, right? That's what people tend to stick with. But it did come back into service. I think, I don't remember if it was Air France or British Airways that brought it back first. But at that point, they had a lot of problems because of the cost of fuel. 9/11 was a big factor that caused it to shut down because air traffic and business flight kind of took shift. People started using video conferences more instead of doing things in person. There was also the fact that Airbus in 2003 dropped support and wasn't going to build parts. And because of the fact that they hadn't built the 300 they had originally envisioned, they had only built 20 aircraft total. They didn't have spare parts, and it was very expensive to replace or modernize any of the parts. So basically, the economy of scale that they thought would happen didn't really happen. As a matter of fact, what they had built, just so you know, they had 2 original prototypes, they had 2 pre-production aircraft, they had 2 development aircraft, so that's 6, and then they had 14 production aircraft that actually flew passengers. And except for 2 of the production aircraft, one was scrapped in 94, and the other one was the one that was crashed, the Air France Flight 4590. The others are all preserved in museums. So you can, I don't know if you've ever been to the Smithsonian or some of the different places, you can actually go see a Concorde, like a real one, hanging up in different places.
There's one parked right at Heathrow Airport as we taxi for departure. And there's also one right at Charles de Gaulle that's mounted on top of a great big stand that you can see as you drive into the airport. They're really cool to look at. They're beautiful airplanes.
And those are real ones, right? Those aren't replicas? Yeah.
No, those are real.
I remember on 60 Minutes, like 5 or 10 years ago, talking about there was 2 or 3 companies out there trying to restart supersonic air travel. I take it, I haven't heard anything since then. I take it this hasn't happened. Is this going to happen again? The technology's there.
Jay, you were just telling me about that.
Yeah, I was just watching a podcast with Mike Rowe, and there's a company called Boom Aerospace.
I do.
They've flown a demonstrator. I think it's about a quarter-size demonstrator, and they have taken a supersonic, and they've got it set so that the sonic boom should dissipate by the time it gets to the ground. They expect it to be no louder than a car door closing.
So that way they can fly over land and make like flights from New York to LA if they get the law changed, right?
But the law still exists. And in fact, I think there's legislation right now where they're trying to overturn that instead of stating supersonic flight, just restricting sonic boom. And so that's going to be a tweak to the law to make it so it's possible to fly supersonic over land.
So do you think this really is going to happen? Like, would you invest in this company?
I have been very, very skeptical, but after watching this podcast, I was really impressed. This guy really seems to have a lot of things figured out. So I'm excited about it.
How long would a flight be from coast to coast in the U.S. if it was supersonic? Like an hour?
Yeah, they're talking about not quite Mach 2, I think, and so it'd be basically half the time of a subsonic airliner. So it's about 4.5, 5 hours west to east. So probably just 2.5 hours. That's just a guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm looking at their website. It says their goal is 1.7, Mach 1.7.
1.7, okay.
Yep. Yep. And they're based in Colorado. What's interesting about this, Alex, because that's a great question, and it's kind of like the Artemis mission going back to the moon, is it's 2026. The technology we have today is so much more advanced. The types of materials you can build with, the size, the weight, the lack of weight, like the lightness of things and the miniaturization of things. It just kind of blows me away that we haven't done this. That we have self-driving cars, that we have, artificial intelligence, but we can't do something that we did in the 70s.
I know. If you took somebody from 1976 forward 50 years in a time machine,
Yeah.
they would expect travel to be so much like it's actually, no offense, Jay, but it's actually worse than it was 50 years ago.
Oh,
right?
I agree wholeheartedly. The hassle factor has just gotten to the point of being ridiculous.
It's not. I mean, it used to be like special and fun, and you dress up, and it was, and now it's just such a freaking hassle.
It's backpacks and flip flops,
right? And takes longer to get to most places, and there's less competition. Don't get me started on that, but like it's more expensive than it was when it was regulated practically.
And you're probably going to have to connect through a hub.
Yeah, exactly. So I think our people in 1976 would be really disappointed. I mean, we probably would have thought we'd be teleporting places by now.
Well, they'd also expect us to have a colony on the moon by this time too, right?
Yeah, good point.
I mean, and probably, I mean, flying cars, right? Why don't we have flying cars? But I do applaud whether or not this boom supersonic does make it. The fact that they're trying to do it, and the fact that they're using private money, just like we've done with rockets, that public-private partnership that seems to work really well. That I think is going to be the key, because the amount of money that was spent for what they did back then is almost. There's things that we did in the past, that we built in the past, humans built or the United States built, that we could never do again because of costs. It's like the costs have gone up so much. Even though the technology is better and more things are available, a lot of things that happened, immediately get shut down. But, it starts to get into politics and stuff like that. But ultimately...
And you could also make the argument that because of the internet and because of things like we're doing right now, it's not necessary for everyone to be able to fly to across the country or to the other continent in 2 hours. We can have Zoom calls.
The airlines have been afraid of that, taking away their business for years, but they found that Zoom calls can only go so far. It takes a smile and a handshake and sharing dinner and drinks and, having a personal touch that really seals the deal, because airlines were terrified of Zoom.
But that's like the post office being afraid of email. I mean, but Jay, if you project yourself forward 50 years, where are we going to be? Is the entire fleet going to be supersonic, or are we going to be pretty much where we're at right now, do you think?
I have been very skeptical of supersonic. I think if we do get it, it'll be a very niche type thing, maybe coast-to-coast flights and international flights. But as far as domestic flights, to go from Houston to Denver only takes 2.5 hours. How much are you going to really save by going supersonic on such a short flight? So I don't know. If your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I've certainly been wrong about my predictions before.
Well, and the other thing you got to keep in mind is that ultimately the supersonic flights from coast to coast or across the pond or whatever, that might not be the end result, right? Everything is a stepping stone. So if doing that, if creating that technology again allows us to do better for space travel, or allows us to figure out new ways to ship things, it's like you don't know what's going to become of it, but that technology could very well lead to something that's completely groundbreaking that we haven't even thought of yet.
Well, this could lead to suborbital flights where you take off and you can be at any point on the entire Earth in 2 hours by taking a shot outside of the atmosphere and then landing like an aircraft. It would be pretty exciting if they could do that.
Yeah, the future's wide open. Well, let's salute the Concorde and those brave souls, those brave French and British people back in the 70s. By the way, I didn't even mention that that the Russians did have a Concorde sort of knockoff we called the Concorde, but it only could fly with afterburners. Like it only could go supersonic with afterburners, and it ate even more fuel and had lots of technological problems. So they scrapped that. And the Americans were in the race as well, but eventually scrapped everything due to costs, politics, a lot of factors, and never actually built one. So I will salute the British and the French for teaming up and doing something pretty amazing during that time.
Yeah, the development by the United States supersonic was government funded, and Boeing really thought that everything was going to be supersonic, and they were really disappointed that the program the government canceled the program, because they were developing the 747 at the time, and they thought that the 747 was just going to be a great big freighter, and that everybody would be flying supersonic. And it turned out the 747 was an amazingly profitable aircraft for its time. And regarding Concorde, there were a lot of data leaks from Europe to the Soviet Union, and the Soviets really, really wanted to try to get an airplane airborne first. And so the British and French would send false information, or they would leak false information mislead the Soviets. And the Soviets actually did fly theirs first, but it was just an absolute shell of an airplane. It couldn't even pressurize. It could not go supersonic, but they could say they flew theirs first. And they also had a Tu-144 supersonic airliner crash at the Paris Air Show. So that really killed that program.
They should have had Bob Hoover flying it. He wouldn't have crashed it.
Yeah, Bob Hoover would have made it work.
That's right. All right. If you haven't checked out the Bob Hoover episode with Jay, that one is available. Thanks, everyone. And next time you're on a flight, don't forget that a long flight could be a good thing, because you could listen to every episode of Dirt Nap City. Even if you heard it before, listen to it again. They get better with age. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.